bringing you in-depth discussion from one of the most read group of online writers covering the Edmonton Oilers. Are you ready for Oilers Overtime? Join us as we talk news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and more, all featured on one of the most glorified teams in the NHL, from the great one to the next one, from the boys on the bus to the decade of darkness. This is Oilers Overtime.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Oilers Overtime. My name is Jim Parsons. I'm here. We're one shy this week. Tegan Gieselbrecht is feeling a little bit under the weather, but we're going to forge on ahead without him. We've got Colton Pankiw with us. Colton, how you doing?
Hey, guys. Good, thanks.
Good. And Brian Swane is down in the corner down there. Brian, how are you?
How you doing, guys?
Good. So we've got a few things to talk about. We're getting really close to the trade deadline. What are we, 6 days away as we record this, 5 days for most people who are going to watch this video tomorrow. There's some news with the Oilers, but there's not a ton to talk about in terms of trades because the Oilers probably aren't going to do a whole lot. Do you guys get the sense that this is probably going to be a very quiet deadline for Edmonton? Colton, I'll start with you. Is there much action to expect here?
Yeah, just listening to a few different things with Chris Johnson, Elliot Freeman. It sounds like they're going to maybe still do the Glendening trade, but aside from that, I don't really expect anything at all. Not just from the Oilers, but for most teams in general.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sold on the Glendening thing anymore, to be totally honest with you. I know that the Oilers are probably going to look for a third line center if they can land one. I don't know that they can. The cap is so tight, and Holland has talked about money in, money out, and the LTIR and everything that goes on with being an LTI. I mean, I think they would like to do it. I've heard more rumblings actually about Derek Ryan out of Calgary than I have Luke Glendening anymore. But I don't know. I mean, maybe Glendening happens. Holland's got a history with Detroit. I don't know. Brian, what do you think? Is this going to be a really quiet deadline? Could we see absolutely nothing coming out of the Oilers?
Yeah, I think that's possible, and I agree with Colton too. I think it's just going to be a quiet deadline all the way around the league, outside of a Taylor Hall blockbuster here or there. I don't think we'll see much action at all, and I do like the suggestion of Derek Ryan. I think he's a guy that fans are very familiar with here in Edmonton from his time with the University of Alberta Golden Bears. Great story. I think he can bring to the team some of the things that they need, and I think he would love to get the opportunity to play in Edmonton. So that one intrigues me. As we talked about last week too, I do like the idea of adding Glendening. But really depending on who you're listening to, that doesn't seem to, as you mentioned, it may not be the slam dunk that we might have thought it was a couple days ago.
Well, everybody was really high on that. I mean, most people figured that was kind of a given, at least that the Oilers would be in the conversation. There's probably more than one team that would be interested in Glendening, and the Oilers were among them. But it just sounds more and more every day that passes like there's little that the Oilers are probably going to be able to do. Even Derek Ryan, who might be a nice option out of Calgary, is going to be a little more pricey than maybe the Oilers can afford. Because the trick here is that Edmonton's got to move cap. They just have to. There's no – when you're talking about players like maybe a Joachim Nygaard or a Tyler Benson or any – put insert name here for the prospect or player that maybe they might want to move – it's not just as simple as saying, okay, well, we'll move this guy on our fourth round pick, which is pretty much all the Oilers have. They're not going to give up their first. You got to convince the other team to take them. So if you're saying, okay, hey, Calgary, take Derek Ryan, or like, give us Derek Ryan, we'll give you a Nygaard in the fourth. Why would Calgary do that? Right? It just doesn't make a sense. So you have to consider both sides. In Detroit's case, are there enough bidders for someone like Glendening that it doesn't really make sense for them to go, yeah, well, we don't really care about your fourth. We can get a third, or we can get a better prospect coming off of this team because they need it. Like, it just seems like the cards aren't aligning and not everything's working out for Edmonton. But I guess it's not all lot. I mean, Ken Holland spent what, $7-8 million during the summer, got 5 players ish, and he's got a lot of depth and very little injury. I mean, maybe the Oilers already have their trade deadline? They just had it at the beginning of the season, because what they do, they added Cahoon, they added Cuckoo. I mean, Cuckoo's really the only one that's gone down for the season, right? They added a lot of people, and they have a lot of depth, still very healthy, still relatively good to go, that they can slot in at any time. Is that more kind of what Holland did? Did he do most of his shopping, Colton, in the offseason, and that was probably all we were really going to see?
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with him, I think just today, and he was saying that a lot of their one-year deals, like they're kind of asking about maybe trading Nugent Hopkins, Barry, or some of those other guys. He said those are almost kind of their they're using them as their own rentals. Like they're on expiring deals. They definitely won't bring all of them back. So it's kind of just, they already have these guys in house, and with the pandemic and everything, that might just be kind of what they do at the deadline, is just consider those bargain pickups and guys like Barry and Nugent Hopkins their own in-house rentals.
Yeah. What about you, Brian? Like, you thinking that the Oilers added enough? Do you think that they actually added enough? Like, this is a pretty good hockey team. I mean, yeah, we've had some struggles against Montreal. We've had some struggles against Toronto, but I think they're like, what, 28-3 or something like that in the last 31 games. It's a decent hockey team. Have they done enough? I mean, I don't know that they're Stanley Cup winners, but they're probably a decent team and could make a little bit of a run in the playoffs. Did they do enough in the summer to get what they needed?
Yeah, I guess the question is, done enough to do what? I mean, yeah, I don't think they're Stanley Cup contenders. Could they win a round or two? Certainly. And I think that I know I would be, from an organizational perspective or from a fan perspective, I'd be satisfied with that coming out of this season with, in terms of the evolution and development and progression of this team. I didn't have, if you look, you mentioned the offseason piece of the end. I think the big one was Tyson Barrie. We talked about how Dylan Holloway could have been potentially the trade deadline acquisition or addition for this team without making a trade. Obviously, that's not going to happen now. And I think you just have to deal with what you have in this situation. We've seen Devon Shore, I think, has again scored against the Habs, so he's contributing a little bit. They've got pieces here. You're right; it's a pretty good hockey team, and I think they're going to run with what they have.
So I heard an interview today. Ken Holland was talking to Bob Stauffer and Oilers Now, and there was some chatter about Mike Smith. The basis of the conversation was that Bob Stauffer said, "Hey, this guy's played pretty well for you. How did that all come about?" Ken Holland was like, "Yeah, he's been excellent for us. He's about 12-3-2." And he told the story about how he told the agent that he wanted to go explore the market, then came back to him and said, "You know what can we do?" And he went from 2.5 to 1.5. And Smith has really outplayed that contract by a wide margin. So now there's some chatter that maybe he's worth re-signing again. And Ken Holland basically said, "Well, why wouldn't I? It's one of those things. He's played so well. I don't care about how old he is." Colton, what do you think about that? Is that something that you'd be interested in doing from an Oilers fan perspective? Would you be like, "Hey, Mike Smith has earned this"? Or would you be at all concerned that his age is too big a factor at this point?
At the end of last season, if you told me that Mike Smith would get extended not only this year, but the next season, I would have been questioning it quite a bit. But I like the thing Holland had said that when he was in Detroit, he had guys that were in his 40s. And he doesn't really care about the age. If they're performing well, then who cares how old they are, kind of thing. He's been really good this year. It would obviously depend on the money. I can't see, like you said, he'll be 39. So I can't see him getting a big raise from this year. So if it's the same money, yeah. I still think you look to bring in a different goalie from Koskinen, but yeah, I'd bring him back.
What about you, Brian? Are you leaning in the favor of, maybe Smith has earned this, maybe Koskinen hasn't, and you go with Smith, you try to move Koskinen, or you keep them as a tandem again because they are working decently as a pairing? Koskinen may not be outperforming his contract. In fact, he's not outperforming his contract, but would you keep both goaltenders, or are you kind of like, "Hey, let's just see where we're at. We'll deal with that when we have to," like they did this last summer?
Oh, I think they got to pursue somebody else in the off season as a number one, but I'd certainly be all for bringing back Smith from what he's shown, as the backup. I don't know if it's ideal to have him as the number one on a team that's going to contend for a Stanley Cup at age 40. Having said that, he's proven age ain't nothing but a number. He's just looked incredible. I cheap plug. I wrote an article about it a few days ago and about the work he's done in the offseason and how he's kind of transformed his game. And, he really has been a whole new goalie this year. It's borne out. And, I don't know how many goalies in the history of the game have been legit number ones at age 40, much less even reliable backups. But he certainly has not shown any signs of rust at this time. And, I think I've talked about this before too. I don't think you can understate what he brings to the team in terms of his leadership. I think he really is, more so than you often see from goalies, a real veteran voice in that, and a real presence in that locker room. And you can even see him when it's on the ice in his body language, how he communicates with teammates. I think he's kind of the guys that kind of sets the tone. He's one of the most emotional guys on the ice. He might very well be on this entire team. And I think it's important to have guys like that. And when you're getting that from your veterans and your leaders and the guys who've been there and done that before, I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, Holland did point to that in the interview. He talked about his passion. He talked about his enthusiasm, his leadership, both on and off the ice. He's one of those guys that will talk it in the locker room, but then he'll do it on the ice and he'll back it up and he'll hold people accountable. And that's a really big deal for a team. And Colton mentioned it earlier. I think even Brian, I think you might have said just one round, even 2 rounds, to get into that is a good step of development for this team. Smith is the guy that sort of needs to usher these people in. He's sort of been there before. He's played those playoff games. A lot of the Oilers really haven't. There's a couple guys on this team that have, but you know, it's going to be very interesting to see what the Oilers do here, because you wouldn't have thought this at the beginning of the time, the season, that Smith would have been your guy and Koskinen would have been well, what do we do with Koskinen? And then we've got Alex Stalock, who we now know is probably not going to play at all this season. So he's practicing, he's out of quarantine, he's with the team, but it sure doesn't sound like he's going to play at all. But we talked about the age, and so I think it's probably a decent way to transition into this next topic, which is the Oilers schedule, because it's tight, but this Vancouver situation, and I'll get your guys' thoughts on this stuff, because it does affect, I mean, first and foremost, we're concerned for the Vancouver players, their families, everybody involved in this whole thing, because it's a mess. It's like, I think 20 out of 23 players, or 20 out of 20, like, I don't know what it is, 18 out of 22 have it now, or at least are on the protocol list. It's ugly. Like, it's gotten really bad. And from what Friedman said, that they're probably not coming back until at least the 16th of April, which will definitely affect the 2 games on the 12th and the 14th for the Oilers. So there's a lot to digest here. And Colton, what's your immediate thought on this Vancouver thing? Like, forgetting the Oilers, how it impacts them, forgetting, you know, the hockey games and the schedule. I mean, how scary, how weird, how odd is this Vancouver stuff?
Well, I think it's kind of a reminder. Like, sometimes it seems like this has been going on for so long that it's just, kind of same old. I think just hearing that, obviously you hear that some of them really are quite sick right now, under the weather. So I think it's just like, this is a real thing. And obviously, like you said, just hopefully they're okay. And I mean, there's even, I think, been some talk about whether or not they can continue the season. So just hopefully they can, but more importantly, just hopefully they're okay in the long run here.
Yeah, Brian, I mean, we've heard a lot of people aren't doing well. I think I don't know for sure, but I hadn't heard anybody been sent to the hospital, but one person got like an IV drip and stuff, and the families have all had to go down and do their tests. And this Brazilian P1 variant is the really scary part about this whole thing, because it spreads like crazy and it affects people who are much younger, like between 3 and 25 years old or what have you. It's pretty devastating. What's your immediate reaction to this? Is this, there's talk about them not playing. There's talk about maybe they won't come back until like the 19th of April. There's talk about the NHL going in a bubble for the playoffs now. What are you thinking with this?
Really contextualizes where we're at, doesn't it? Or I should say, puts in perspective where we're at. I think we've kind of, for the most part, especially with the North Division, we hadn't had any issues until the Habs had to postpone a couple games. Otherwise, it's been smooth sailing here, relatively speaking, with respect to the pandemic. And we got lulled into, I don't want to say lulled into a false sense of security, but things were pretty normal. And this is certainly as Colton pointed out, this is a real reminder that this is real. This is very serious, and especially the new variants. So, especially when we've heard so many cases of, whether it be in the NFL, baseball last year, the NBA, and now the NHL. There's been many instances of athletes getting this, but very rarely have we heard of it being something that severely infected them. And now you hear about, like you say, like guys getting an IV drip and things like that. This new variant is real, and it's, if you're a 25-year-old athlete, doesn't necessarily mean that you're immune to it any more than anybody else is. The one thing that I would like to touch on, though, is with not only for the Canucks, but for the Flames and the Sens as well. These guys are so far out of the playoff hunt now. It's pretty much a done deal with the top 4 teams in the North. What is the motivation for these teams to play? They're not getting a gate. They don't go out and play in front of their home fans to get the motivation that way. Is it worth the risk? As we see, because this is obviously very much a risk for the teams to continue playing, as we see with the Canucks. Do they want to keep going for another 3 or 4 weeks just so that the Habs and the Leafs and the Oilers and the Jets can fill out their schedule and play the games they have to? Does it make sense to do that from a league perspective?
Well, I think probably the biggest factor, and I hate to say that this is the biggest factor because it's kind of sad that it is probably sponsorship. probably the commitments and the contracts that went along with playing a 56-game season. They're going to try to get in as much of that as they possibly can. But I'm with you. Like, when you're not going to make the playoffs and you pretty much know it, and even if you were to try, the team you're coming back with is going to be a shadow of itself because they're going to have minor league players filling in spot. I mean, there's just really no way that Vancouver's going to be competitive at this point. And they weren't necessarily competitive even with their full team, slotted in there. So yeah, it's kind of a catch-22. You also have like players who may not want to come back. Like, even when they're back and they're healthy and they go, you know what, this season's a write-off. Like, it was one thing when we were separated from our families and we're all doing okay. And now we've all been sick and I don't want to go back and I don't want to be sick. And what am I fighting for if I'm not going to be like, I could see a handful of players just going, I'm done. Like, my season's over. We saw it with, Niskanen out of Philadelphia. Like, these guys decided they just didn't want to play. Like, they went through the bubble, and this whole idea of the playoff bubble is scaring a lot of players. They're just like, we do not want to do this again. This is not where we want to go. So it wouldn't shock me at all if some of these guys don't decide to just hang it up for the season, right? And not come back. Win? No, I can't.
Yeah, and I mean, just touching on the bubble. I mean, even like you said, in the bubble, there were guys that were deciding that they didn't want to take part in it. That's when you had it. Every team that was in the bubble had a chance to win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah,
we could have guys coming out here that are playing that have 10 games left in their season, 3 weeks left to go. They're 15, 20 points out of a playoff berth. They're separated from their families. They're out there on the road, putting themselves at risk. What is the motivation?
Colton, what do you think it does for the Oilers in the playoffs? The rest of the games headed towards the playoffs? I mean, I guess the big consequence here is who you get, right? I think really for most of these teams, it's just getting in, being one of those 4 teams. But the Oilers have a serious issue against some teams, and they play pretty decent against Winnipeg. Not so great against Montreal, not so great against Toronto. That could have, but do you think they even see all 56 games? Like, will the Oilers get those games in? Because the schedule at the end of the season is going to be very, very tight. We've got these 2 games coming up on the 12th and the 14th, assuming Vancouver can come close to coming back at any time after that. Like, do you think the Oilers get these games rescheduled? Do they play them? Do they just postpone them? And how do you think that affects the Oilers' sort of run towards maybe the first place spot in the division and getting that advantage, or does it even matter?
I mean, I think it matters. I think, like you said, I don't even know if first place. Because I think it'll probably end with Edmonton, Winnipeg kind of battling over second and third. And I think that's really who you want to play. I think you don't want to come fourth, play in Toronto, obviously. And then, like you said, if they come first, it's probably Montreal. They haven't played them great either. In terms of finishing the season, I don't know. I hope they can, but there's lots of talk that it might come down to the points percentage kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see how the next week or 2 here plays out.
Yeah, the league certainly wants to avoid that. I mean, they don't want to have a situation where they have to use points percentage and all that other stuff that goes with it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's selfish to think this way, and I know that the players aren't doing it. But Brian, what about some of the individual seasons that these Oilers are having? Because you've got McDavid, Draisaitl, top 2 in the league. You've got Tyson Barrie having a fantastic year. You've got Darnell Nurse, who should be in the Norris Trophy conversation. Mike Smith's having a great season. Like, some of that matters a little, right? Maybe not as much to the players, but a guy like Tyson Barrie matters how many points he gets. You know what I mean? Like, do you think that's even weighing on the Oilers at this point, or are they just kind of like, look, we want to get in, play as many games as we can, as safely as we can, and we'll deal with it when we get there?
It shouldn't be weighing on them, and I don't think it is. I don't think. I'm sure Connor McDavid, if you ask him, would like to get 100 points. He'd like a chance to get it, but all things being what they are, I think the team goals is the ultimate, and anyone who isn't putting it that way is not somebody you want to have part of your team anyway. And I'm not suggesting I don't think that's a big deal to any of these guys. It's funny though, as you brought that up, that one of the first things that kind of a consistent theme that I'd seen on social media when this news kind of came down or started to become apparent that they might not play a full 56 games. That was what a lot of fans were saying was, what about the stats? McDavid's kind of fallen pretty far off the 100-point pace now anyway. I mean, he's going to need to have a couple 5-pointers here against these next 2 games against the Sens to get himself back in that mix. I think he's on pace for 91 or 92 points right now. And to get himself back up to where he's going to be on pace to score 100 is going to take a lot over whatever it is, 17, 18 games, I think, left, or maybe not even that many now.
Yeah. And have that many big gaps, right? Because we're going to have some big spacing and then some really tight games and then some spacing again. It's I don't know how you get your rhythm, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, those are things that, this is the cards that we've all been dealt again. And They have to deal with it. They ended up having to go to point percentage in the end to decide the playoffs seedings last year, or at least the play-in round seedings and who got buys into the playoff rounds. So, not ideal, but this is where we are.
So here's my question. We talked about it. We touched on it a little earlier. The trade deadline, we think is probably going to be pretty quiet for Ken Holland, that the Oilers probably won't do much. They might try to add a third line center if they can. We know probably that a left winger on the second line is out of the question because it's just too expensive to do it. With the pieces that you have, and this is the team that you're sending to the playoffs, we've seen no Evan Bouchard. We've seen very little of a Caleb Jones. We've seen James Neal's been on the taxi squad, and he looks like he's staying there. Are you comfortable with this team, Colton? Like the way that he is Tippett is slotting these people in there, who he's using, who he's not. Do you think that he's making the right choices? If we had to touch on this real quickly, are we good with the way that he's slotting this team? Or do you see a player that needs to be in there and like getting some final games in here before the playoff push?
I mean, the one that I was kind of questioning a bit, I guess, was Caleb Jones, and then I thought he was pretty good last game. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe he gets in a bit more. But no, I mean, it's unfortunate, like we touched on before with the Evan Bouchard thing. But I mean, it's just a weird year, right? So I think, what can you do? He's given the team the best chance to win right now. I think when you have guys like McDavid and Draisaitl in their prime, I think that's what's most important. So I really have no issues with what he's doing right now.
Yeah, I wrote about Evan Bouchard, and basically he's sort of in no man's land because of the fact that he's too good to not have access to, but he's not quite good enough where everybody who's healthy, he's going to supplant anybody on that roster. And they've got so many righties, they've got Barry, they've got Larson, they got Bear. Where do you put Bouchard in there, right? So I guess the question would only be, well, if we're not going to keep Tyson Barrie, do we want to develop Bouchard? But that doesn't make sense at this point in the season, right? It doesn't make sense. Why would you do that and risk any possible losses? Because wins and losses matter heavily at this point. What about you, Brian? Are you comfortable with this roster? Is this if they don't do anything at the trade deadline and the way that they're deploying the players and the lineup matches and stuff? I mean, obviously there's going to be the line shuffling and things like that, but are you comfortable with this team?
Yeah, pretty much. I think in terms of both player development and maximizing it to get the results in the standings, I think that it's been all around successful for the Oilers this year, with the exception, the one fail would be the Bouchard situation. But as you guys touched on, it's just it's a weird year. That's the situation they're in, and this is going to be. But they have failed Bouchard, I think, and that might be a bit of a strong way to say it. But leaving a kid at that age to spend most of this season in the press box, I don't think it's certainly not going to do him any good. And in terms of trying to develop him for the future for the club, hasn't getting good either. But beyond that, with the lineup they're putting on the ice, like I was saying earlier, I think this is a team that can win a round or two, and then once you get into the playoffs, once you're in the dance, anything can happen, right? And we've seen the one thing that I was thinking of that with Smith is we saw this in 2006 with Dwayne Rollison. Just kind of came out of nowhere, an older goalie, and just got hot at that right time. And he had that experience. He had some characteristics that reminded me of Smith, and he helped take them all the way to the finals. And not that I'm saying it could happen or will happen again this year, but yeah, why not, right?
Rollison had that throw it up and bat it out of the air clearing thing. Wasn't that him? They used to do that all the time. Yeah, they both like
he was a different dude, which Mike Smith kind of is too.
Yeah. Okay. So I had asked you guys before we came on this week about a potential would you rather scenario. One of those things where I'll throw out something and maybe you guys could throw out something and you have to pick one or the other. Did you guys both get a chance to think about one?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll go with the first one. I wrote an article on it. I got some interesting comments from, I think, both Maple Leafs fans and Oilers fans. But my question was, should the Oilers, and we have to understand that there's some what ifs going on here. If Nugent Hopkins and the Oilers can't come to terms, so it gets a little ugly, he decides to go off in free agency and test the market, would the Oilers be better off maybe focusing and shifting their focus to a player like Zach Hyman? So would you rather have Nugent Hopkins at, say, 6.2 million or Zach Hyman at about 4.75, giving you some time and space to do other things? So if you had the choice, between keeping Nugent Hopkins at about 6.2 for 5 or 6 years, and then Zach Hyman for about 4 years at 4.75. Who would you go with? Colton, let's start with you. Who would you rather have, Nugent Hopkins or Zach Hyman?
Is Hyman the same term, 5 years?
I'm assuming, and from what we're hearing, that Hyman's looking for somewhere just over 4 million, that he probably could get as high as 5 on the open market, but that's going to be pretty high for him. I would guess a team, because of the way he's playing this year, would go 4, maybe 5 years. I was ballparking around 4. I really don't know. All I do know is that he's had a fantastic season. People seem to really like this guy. He offers you a ton of special teams. He can play power play and penalty kill. He's an awesome forechecker. I think he's just sort of starting to come into his own. The only thing he isn't is a center, right? So he's a winger where Nugent Hopkins is a center. So let's just say 4.5 million for 4 years. That's what Hyman's going to cost you as a free agent.
Yeah. I mean, he's kind of like, some might disagree with this, but he's almost kind of what the Oilers want Zach Kassian to be and what he can be when he's on his game, right? Just that kind of guy that'll grind down on McDavid's line like he does that for Matthews. The only concern and why I was asking the term is those kind of players tend to kind of hit a wall at 30. I think he's 28 right now. But 4 years is interesting. I'll say, since I'm a big Nugent Hopkins fan, I'll say Nugent Hopkins, but it's a good debate, and I would definitely understand why someone would say it the other way around.
Sorry, I missed the last thing. You would understand why somewhat?
Oh, sorry. I understand why somebody would say it the other way around. I definitely would be able to hear the argument on that.
You can see both sides of it. What about you, Brian? Who would you rather? Would you rather have Nugent Hopkins say 6 years, 6.2 million, or Hyman at say 4.5, 4.75 for about 4 years?
Boy, well, you know what? I'll play devil's advocate here. For the shorter term and a little bit less money, I might be really tempted to go with Hyman. I think he brings a lot of assets to the table that you're looking for, or that this team needs. Boy, that's a tough one. It's tough. It's tough to sit there and think that this could be. I think I've always kind of figured out that ultimately Nugent Hopkins would resign, that he would kind of be an Oiler for not forever, but a very long time. But it's starting to become a little bit real now. And you're starting to think, you know what? Okay, maybe, we got to look at what the future could be without him and who would be taking his place. That said, I think Nugent Hopkins, I don't want to judge him on what we've seen the last month or a few weeks, because he's having a tough go of it right now. Whether it's the contract talks that are weighing on him or who knows, but when he is on, he brings so many things to the game in terms of being a two-way player and a guy who can produce, and you can use him throughout the lineup, as we've seen them do liberally this year. He's the kind of guy, he's one of the guys that they be able to throw on any line, and you can feel pretty confident putting him out there with whoever his partners are. So I've almost just kind of talked myself out of it here, haven't I? I don't know, man. That's
sitting on the fence. I guess you could sit on the fence. I wanted you to pick one, but that's okay.
Here's the term. It's the term that 6 years does give me pause with Nugent Hopkins, and close to 7 million. If that's what we're looking at, that gives me pause too.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm aware that I think the Nugent Hopkins deal will get done. Let me put that right out there first. I think that deal will get done. They'll figure it out. The two sides will sit down. They both want to be here, and they both want him to stay. I think it'll get done. I also think that Zach Hyman in Toronto will get done. I don't know that he's going to hit free agency. I know he's going to get paid, but I have a feeling from watching what Kyle Dubas does, moving that roster around, somebody else is going and Hyman is staying. So having said all that, if I could choose and Hyman became a free agent because the money didn't work in Toronto and Nugent Hopkins was going somewhere else, I might actually pick Zach Hyman. I like Nugent Hopkins a lot, but what I also like about Hyman, not only can he do a lot of things that the Oilers could use, I think he's the Kyler Yamamoto for the first line for McDavid, right? Bigger, stronger, digs out that puck and does everything that Yamamoto is supposed to do on that second line. But I like the freedom that having the extra money gives Ken Holland to do other stuff, like get a third line center if he needs to, sign that extra defenseman if he wants to, go out and search for a goaltender if he's not 100% confident in Mikko. It gives you room that you didn't have, and $2.5 million, $2 million, that's a chunk of change in a flat salary cap, right? That's a lot of money. So I like that idea, but I like both players a lot. I like Nugent Hopkins a lot. I think it'll get done. But it was a very interesting question. When the reason I ask it is because Darren Dreger said on a podcast, he just threw it out there. What if Hyman goes and he goes for a smoking deal and signs with the Edmonton Oilers? I have no idea why he said it. but he just threw it out there. And I was like, that's a very interesting question. Like, what would happen if that happened? All right. Who wants to go next? Colton, you good? You got one?
Yeah. Mine was just going to be, assuming they were able to bring Nugent Hopkins back into the fold already. If you could get a winger that would be a perfect fit for McDavid, left or right wing or a starting goalie, which one would you guys prefer?
Are we talking about this season or next season?
Next season, sorry.
I haven't taken a really close look at the free agency list, but one of the players that I like a lot, and he hasn't had the most wonderful season, but I think he could fit really well in Edmonton, is Mike Hoffman. And there's a lot of talk right now that he might be traded out of St. Louis. He signed as a free agent for $4 million. So clearly there's some sort of like, what is this player to us? How valuable is he? Why can we get him for cheap when he's a 20, 25 goal guy almost every year? I think the overstated fact that he might be a locker room problem is really, really overstated. I don't think he's that big an issue at all. And the fact that he might be that sniper for McDavid, where you've got a Jesse Puljujarvi digging out and you've got a Hoffman shooting it, like I think that combination could work. I know they badly need a top six left winger. They just do, right? You got Nugent Hopkins. I don't know if they're going to play him there or they're going to try to get him at the center role. I think that's a real question they're going to have to answer. But I think that top six winger is something they're going to need. And I think they're going to have to spend some money to go out and get it. If you can get Hoffman, at $4 or $5 million, he's going to get you 20 goals easy every year, right? So I like the idea of some guaranteed production.
And Brian, I guess
I'll echo that. Tyson Barrie was kind of the white whale for this team for a long time in terms of the puck moving defenseman. And I think a top six left winger is next on that checklist. If you can have an opportunity to get him, I go for it.
All right. What about you, Colton? Did you answer your own question?
It's funny you brought up Hoffman because that was the guy this last offseason I was thinking would fit really good with McDavid. But I was worried for some reason that he was going to get term and a lot of money. And I don't know how much money he signed for, but just the 1 year deal, obviously. So, he's not having a good year in St. Louis. He would come cheap. So I think depending on the price, obviously, I think that I would go with that winger as well.
All right, Brian, you had a question?
I do. I just brought up Tyson Barrie. Number one, I guess it's a two-parter, but would you look to bring him back? And number two, what is your breaking point in terms of term and length?
You want to go first, Colton? You want me to go first?
I can go. The term I think is a really big. I guess it depends. If you can get him at longer term for the cheaper dollar, obviously, I think the highest. It's hard to say because I think he'll be able to command quite a bit with the year he's having. I don't know if you want to give him much over 6, but at the same time, he might almost kind of laugh at that with the year he's having. If you can get him at 6.5 maybe in 4 years, you guys might think that's a little crazy, but I don't know, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I was thinking 4 might be the max term I'd go. I think if they can get him on a 3-year deal, that works for both sides because Tyson Barrie will make some money. He can have some really productive seasons in Edmonton. I don't know that I'd go more than 5. Not that I don't think Tyson Barrie is worth more than 5. I actually think he might be worth more than 5, even though he's pretty one-dimensional. What I'm concerned about with spending too much money is we, don't know what is going on with Oscar Klefbom. We have no idea if he's going to come back, and that's a $4 million cap hit if he does. We don't know if he's going to be claimed by Seattle. So I love that top 4. If you got Darnell Nurse and Tyson Barrie, then Oscar Klefbom and Adam Larson, but then you also got to sign Adam Larson. And I don't know what that's going to cost you. I don't think it should cost you much more than it does now, maybe even less than it does now, maybe somewhere around 3.5. But I think the 5 gives you the flexibility to get that top 4 done. And then you don't have to put any pressure on Ethan Bear. You don't have to put any pressure on anybody else who happens to be in that role. Whoever they keep, if it's Cuckoo who comes back or something like that on that left side, that's a decent, it's not like a highly super, although Nurse is becoming a star. There's no real oh my gosh, he's a top 3 defenseman in the league, but Nurse might be, that's a pretty decent top 4. So if I can get that done and Tyson Barrie's willing to take another discount for 3 years, he just loves it here so much. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to just rock this next 3 years. I might get one more contract out of it. If I do, you can do 3 years at $5 million. I would do it.
Yeah, I think if you bring back Clefbaum being what he was before, that's a really good top four. I mean, I'm getting a bit off track here, but I think from what I've seen from Nurse, I mean, and maybe we can touch on this next time, I think he deserves to be in the Norris Trophy conversation. I really do. And Tyson Barrie, he's done what he's done. I don't think I'd want to go any more than 5 if it's more than $5 million per year, if it's more than 3 years. I like your idea, Jim, of getting him for 3 years. I think that works out well for both parties. Anything longer than that, I'm also getting a little bit nervous. It's also a decision they may have to make without really knowing what Clefbaum's future is. Even if they have a good sense of how his surgery's gone and what his long-term prognosis is, you don't know what the player is going to be like when he steps out on the ice. So they're going to have to make this decision in free agency before they really have that. So, I mean, it's you're taking a risk one way or the other.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll probably say about the Tyson Barrie term is that if you go longer than 3 years, you're getting into Darnell Nurse's bridge territory. And so when you have to give that guy an extension, which is probably going to be a massive amount of money, you don't want to have locked yourself into a player who could produce a lot less than he's producing this season. Like, I like Tyson Barrie a lot, and he is an excellent power play guy, but this might be the best season he ever has for Edmonton. Like, we have to be realistic about that, right? So if that's the case, and then you've handcuffed yourself with Darnell Nurse, who's going to be worth $8-9 million a season, you can't do that if you've got Tyson Barrie on a 4 or 5 year deal, right? So that would be my only thought about that. All right, that's a good show. Thank you, guys. That's going to do it for us. We've got a bunch of good content coming up. We're going to have an NHL trade deadline rumor rundown before the trade deadline on the 12th. We've got tons of great content on the YouTube channel, so everybody go check that out. I'd love it if you guys would like and subscribe to this page, share the video, tweet it out, do whatever you need to do to let everybody know that we do this show every week. Colton, thank you. Brian, thank you. Hopefully we'll have Tegan back next week, and we'll get the chance to talk about the trade deadline and maybe what the Oilers didn't do. I don't know. All right, guys, that's another edition of the Oilers Overtime video show. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you guys next week.